important resources. And following the formal presentation, we'll enable the chat feature for any questions that you may have. Okay, so with employees across the country sheltering in place and working remotely, they're tuning into video calls to chat with friends, family members, colleagues, and customers. There are a number of free services available, but Zoom seems to be the most increasingly, the one that's most popular and that people are choosing. The Chamber has been using the Zoom program for our webinar series as the virtual network and our virtual networking programs over the past couple weeks. Lesson aLIVE and its CEO and co-founder, Valerie Serra, has been administrating our host functions for us here at the Chamber as we bring you our webinar series. Valerie Serra is a former Project Management Office Vice President and is a veteran of managing virtual meetings. In her more than 20-year career managing large projects and project portfolios at PricewaterhouseCoopers and TMG Health, Valerie has hosted virtual meetings for global audiences long before Zoom has even existed. Valerie has a bachelor's degree in accounting from the University of Scranton, an MBA from California State University, and will complete her master's degree in education, innovation, instruction in 2020. Valerie has offices in the Tech Ridge Center and is a client of the Chamber's Ignite program. And at this time, it's my pleasure to introduce to you Valerie Serra and Lesson aLIVE.
Thank you, Amy, for the great introduction and for being brave enough to appear on video with us today. I know that this is a new feature for many, so we do appreciate it. And thank you for the introduction. All right, we are going to get started here today. So one of the things I'm going to do while I present today is I'm going to give you a little bit of a behind the scenes look at what I'm doing as the host while I'm speaking and presenting, so you know some of what's going on in the meantime. So thank you for coming today. This is 101, which means we're going to really be covering mostly the basics that you can expect to experience if you're going to utilize Zoom. And I just want to start off with, a little bit of sort of why. Amy spoke a little bit about why Zoom for today, but I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. Okay, so one of the things that I really would like to just take a minute and address is, you've seen data like this a million times, right? Humans process visual information far faster and more aptly than text or audio. And that is not new for any of you. But what's new right now is an environment in which you almost have no choice but to come along for this video meeting evolution. And so I wanted to take a second to recognize that as you no longer have to do this, which might be the case in a few weeks or a few months because you get to return to business as normal, I hope that you think about the benefits that you had within your organization or even just within your family from utilizing these features and these technologies and put them in place in a way that brings continuous value outside of this era. So first of all, just a second on, why video? So we've been holding large conference calls for years, and I'm sure all of you have successfully, been able to have great and effective meetings that way. But 62% of executives agree that video conferencing significantly improves the quality of communication inside meetings. And so I would hope that you would take that back and say, okay, we're not always going to be physically together for meetings, but we can utilize this video conferencing platform going forward. And so it improves communications, it can help you build relationships and maintain relationships. And when I say build relationships, right, it gives you an opportunity to go face-to-face with somebody that you otherwise might not have had an opportunity to go face-to-face with, perhaps somebody from across the world. It's a proven time saver and a money saver. So where I might have in the past needed to physically go to a meeting, I can now instead have a virtual meeting, right? And so that is a great way for us to think about how do we consider maybe utilizing virtual meetings instead of travel, or instead of physically going somewhere I didn't need to travel to, even if it was just a few miles away. And then for this era, of course, we have perhaps a new revenue channel, or maybe you're just looking to preserve business right now. And so you have to transition. Let's face it, Zoom has been around for almost 10 years at this point. They've been free just as long, but you might not have been using them. So why all of a sudden all of the interest? Well, most of that is because you're trying to preserve business, you're trying to maintain relationships. And so that is really what's driving us here today. So why Zoom? Amy spoke about that a little bit, but number one, the basic account is free. And so that is a really good reason that a lot of people are jumping on board. And Zoom has made their platform free for educators for a long time. So the educational community has been utilizing Zoom. And on top of that, they've actually, during this crisis, extended a lot of features that normally wouldn't be part of a free account for many of their users, such as under a basic account, there is a meeting limit of 40 minutes. And they have temporarily waived that meeting limit for certain types of users, like those in education and those in healthcare. So that's part of the reason that you're seeing a very large Zoom economy happening in front of you. But additionally, Zoom is extremely user-friendly. And so there are a lot of features that are easy to use. And there's a lot of features that they have that you can grow into. So you might start with the basic account and then start to realize that there's a lot more you can do with the platform. And so it's extremely simple to upgrade to paid versions of the account. You could, basically do it on a single click. Additionally, and I think most of you probably realize this because you've joined us today, attendees only need a web link to join. And so it is super simple for anyone to jump on board. Any type of technology that they have, whether it's a mobile phone or a desktop or a laptop or a tablet, you really can join very simply. And then the last thing I want to point out is that there is a lot of help. They have spent a lot of time and a lot of money creating wonderful help tools for their user community. And so I'm going to show you a little bit more about all of this. I do not represent Zoom. In fact, I wouldn't even consider myself to be a long-time Zoom user. I've used a lot of different tools over the years, and most of the features as you cross tools are fairly similar. But with the explosion of Zoom, it makes sense for everybody to, really get acclimated. Whether or not you plan to host or just be an attendee, it's a good idea to understand this tool. So we're going to dive in a little bit here on some of the basic, features and functions today. As Amy mentioned, we will definitely have some time for Q&A at the end. So this is basically what our agenda looks like today. So we're going to cover the basics of I'm a participant. So how do I act as a good participant in a meeting? I'm invited to a meeting. What should I expect? You're all here today, so you have the basics probably already covered, but I'm going to go through a few things and I'm going to show you a few features that you might be interested in. Second, we're going to get a little more advanced and we're going to talk about hosting meetings. So I think that I actually want to use this for my business or even just for personal use. And so I need to learn how to host a meeting. So we're going to get you started there. We're going to talk about some features and functions that everybody can utilize, whether you're a user or a host. And then I'm going to give you my top 10 hosting tips, including 5 specifically for larger scale events. So with that said, we're going to go ahead and get rolling here. So first of all, I promised you that I would give you sort of a behind the scenes on some of what I'm doing as the host. So today I am the host of this session. And as Amy mentioned in the introduction, I actually have been performing the host function for several of the chamber events over the last couple of weeks as they started to bring forward a lot of webinars. We are actually not using the Zoom webinar technology, we're actually using Zoom meetings. And so while we call these events webinars, Zoom actually calls these events meetings. And so I will jump out and show you some of the Zoom platform in a few minutes. But I just wanted to give you that difference because it is an important differential. When we jump over, I'll show you that. On my screen, I am sharing a PowerPoint presentation. I'm going to go through sharing functions, but sharing is obviously one of the most common things that you're going to encounter, whether you're a host or whether you're an attendee. Either way, you're going to be part of a screen sharing experience for almost any event you attend. I am obviously displaying my video today, but when I set up this meeting for all of us to get together, there were a couple of things that I did in my basic functions to really kind of control what you're experiencing as you come into the event. So while I am currently on video, everyone else has their video turned off. That isn't a coincidence because when we set up our meetings, we set them up with a video off upon entry. Now, one interesting thing about Zoom, and you can look and look and you're gonna find this everywhere no matter what, you cannot prevent your attendees from turning on their video. So in this session, while we have a configuration that brings participants in with video off, that does not prevent our participants from turning their video back on. Their video is not locked at any time during this session. So all of you have probably learned how to turn your video on and off at this point, but a couple of you, as you came into the meeting, your video was on, and I actually went ahead and turned your video off for you. You might not have known how that happened, but because I'm the host, I have a control function that allows me to do that. Now, if you went ahead and turned it back on, I could turn it back off again, and so we could sort of play that little game. But I think most of you didn't intend to actually be on video, and so I turned that video off for you because you probably accidentally started the start video button. So you are an attendee, I am the host, and the most basic features that you're going to need to be a good attendee are what you see on the screen here. So I just spoke about the video, and that little video camera will allow you to turn your video on and off. The arrow next to the video, which is just this tiny little video button here and the arrow next to it, will actually give you some kind of fun features that I would definitely suggest you explore a little bit. One of the greatest features that's in that start video is virtual background, and I'll give you a little look at that as we go through a little bit later. And also in there is actually a touch-up that you should all know about, especially if you're going to be presenting, because it actually creates a softer light. So there's a lot of other settings in there. You can take a look, but you know, basically as a participant, you just need to know how to turn your video on and off. Now again, because we're using Zoom meetings and not Zoom webinars, this video is always available because the idea behind a meeting is that participants can come in and provide a little bit of feedback, perhaps have a discussion. And so while we're looking and functioning more like a webinar, this is really intended to be a technology that can be used also for meetings. Okay, also on the far left is join audio. You are already all on audio alongside me, so you've already figured out how to connect audio. But you are all muted right now, and so that is one thing that the host can control throughout the session. Unlike video, where you can turn your video on and off, there is a setting that allows the host to mute upon entry as well as to mute the entire session. So right now, all of you are actually on a mute intentionally, since this is the type of session where we're doing more of a lecture/webinar type of program. Okay, so you're probably wondering why I keep sort of looking to the right when the camera's straight in front of me. And so here's my next tip of the day. Because where I have my own video screen placed, which is off to the right, and by the way, you can move your video screen around, and you can move my video screen around just by dragging it around. You can also change the type of view you have on the video, so you can play around with those features on my video, and you could turn my video off altogether. I'll still be projecting, but you don't have to look at me. and you could change other views. So if you take a peek at the box where I am currently floating right now, you can play around with some of the features in that box. Those are your personal settings, so you won't impact any of us if you change the view on your screen. So you could play around there safely. Just know that, you know, those settings are yours and yours only. And so you really can't, you know, do any meeting harm. So if you want to play around while I'm speaking, you can move me around and you can move the view around, and there's other things that you can do up in that video box. Okay. So some of the other icons that you're going to see on your normal screen will include a host invite ability, as well as in certain sessions you will be enabled to send an invitation, which means you could be in the session and bring somebody else along. It depends on the settings of the session. There's a participants button that you will see on your screen as well, and this will generally allow you to engage with other participants and see who else is in the session. Again, I'll talk a little bit more about some of those settings as we go. The share button is actually enabled for this meeting, and that allows for other participants in the session to screen share. Very rarely do we turn that off, because most of the time in our events, we have multiple people who are going to share their screen at some point. So we usually keep that enabled, and generally speaking, most participants don't want to share their screen unless they have to, so rarely do we see an issue with that. But actually, we had a session this morning, and we actually had a participant who accidentally hit the share button during the event. I don't know that anybody noticed it but me, because as the host, I was able to go in and quickly unshare that participant's screen before, and I think most people probably even noticed, with the exception maybe of our guest speaker, and all was well with the world. But you do have the ability to share, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about share functions soon. And then there's a chat function, and we will use that chat function later to enable you to send some Q&A, some questions over for me, so that would be great. You can also chat with the host generally at any time, and our configuration is currently set up for this meeting so that you can really only chat with the host. And that's because when you have large-scale meetings where, you know, you have, I'll just say like more than 20 participants, the concern is that a open chat function can get distracting to the meeting if people start sending notes or start sending questions. And so generally speaking, in sessions like this, we control the chat, and that's what we did today as well. Okay, and then finally there's a record button, and depending on the settings, even you as a participant might have the ability to record the session that you're in. Most of the time, the security is set up by the host so that you can't record, but they are probably recording the session. So these are some of the features that you will see, generally speaking, as an attendee on any type of session that you would be a part of. And then finally, I want to take a moment and point out there's a leave meeting button. If you leave the meeting, you obviously do have the ability to come back into the session unless the host doesn't allow you back in case it's a session where once you're out, you know, those rules should generally be provided in advance if that's the case. But you can leave the meeting without ending the meeting for anybody else, so you never need to be afraid of using that. But obviously for the host, my button says leave meeting or end meeting, and I have the ability to end the session for everybody. Okay. So I mentioned again, I was using a PowerPoint, and as I page through the PowerPoint that I have up right now, I am just hitting my page down button, just so you know how to manipulate the screen when you are presenting a PowerPoint. Just a very simple page down. Some people do have remotes that they use, and there is a function and feature that you can use a remote control to change pages, but very simple page down on my laptop is what I'm using. So, okay, so this might seem a little redundant because you're already all here, but I just want to make sure you know that there are a lot of options for joining Zoom meetings. None of them require you to actually have a Zoom account, and none of these options require your attendees to have a Zoom account if you host. If you host, you have to have a Zoom account, of course. So there is a Zoom app, and you can generally get that for any mobile device as well as for laptop or desktop at this point. So that is one very simple way to join. And generally speaking, if you join via the app, all you actually need is the 9-digit meeting ID that is generally provided in a meeting invitation. When you are joining a meeting like this, we have been providing you with a link as well as a phone number and a meeting ID. And so that meeting ID, whether you're using it for the phone or whether you're using it to join on an app, is the same meeting ID. It doesn't differentiate how you're joining. The meeting ID is the meeting ID. A direct link, which is what most of you would have used today, which is just a link that was provided by the host. Most of the time, if those come over into your email inbox, they're usually a what we would call like a hot link, so you could just click on it to launch. If it's not, you can always copy paste and pop it up into your favorite web browser, and you could use any web browser. The Zoom website, you can actually go out to the Zoom website, and there is a feature, a button that says join a meeting, and it's going to basically, once again, just ask you for that 9-digit code. And then finally, telephone dial-in. So if you do not have a device that allows you to connect through the internet, so no laptop, no desktop, no smartphone, or no tablet, then you can always just listen in. And I want to point this out because while the whole intention here is for these meetings to be live and for us to use video conferencing, there are obviously some times where you have guests that either don't have a device, and we're seeing that in schools right now where we have students that are joining sessions who don't have a device, but they do have access to a telephone, so they could still listen in. And obviously there's just certain circumstances where somebody can't connect. They're somewhere where they have bad service. And so they can always still dial in and listen to the call. I also want to point out, and I'm actually going to take you back one page here. In the join audio section, when you first come on, most of you get prompted. And everyone's experience is a little different because depending on whether you have a desktop or you're using a mobile device or if you're using an app, everything, you know, the way you come into a meeting, that experience is a little bit different. But somewhere in that process, unless you clicked a button at one point that said, never ask me this again, generally it's going to ask if you want to join via telephone audio or computer audio. And so most of you today have joined us via computer audio, but you can join via telephone audio. And I would suggest that you think about doing that if you're in a place where there is not good service and your internet connection is spotty, and or you're competing for bandwidth. We do see that a lot right now. A lot of you are working at home and competing, as I am, with PlayStation and On Demand and Netflix and, you know, all the everything else, all the devices in your house. So you might want to consider that depending on maybe your role. If you're going to be a speaker and you're concerned with your bandwidth at home, you might consider dialing in. Or just if you're afraid that your service might be spotty and in and out. If you are going to dial in using the telephone audio connected to your computer, it's important that you follow the instructions on the screen because they will prompt you with the steps that you should take. Zoom will always give you a phone number to dial into, which is a local number, unless you're working with someone who has an upgraded account, who has a dedicated 800 number. Some large organizations do have those for larger corporate accounts. So you're gonna get a local number, and I say local, it'll say New York, Chicago, Los Angeles. It'll give you a list of numbers, as well as the opportunity to select an international option. The important thing is besides that 9-digit meeting ID that you will have, you will also be given on your screen, if you assume that you're going to dial in via telephone audio, a participant ID. That participant ID is really important because it's what connects your computer video to your telephone audio so that you as a participant come up the same way in this meeting. And so that is the best possible scenario. Otherwise, you look like two different attendees. And so if you do need to participate and somebody needs to perhaps mute you or unmute you or bring your video live. It's going to be very complicated because your video and your audio look like two separate participants. And so you definitely need to think about connecting your computer video to your telephone audio if you are using that process to log in. Okay. So what does a Zoom invitation look like? So most of the time when you're going to go to a Zoom meeting, you will receive an example invitation that looks like this, and usually in your email inbox, and then hopefully gets moved to your calendar, right? So a couple of things. One, you will always have the date and time, of course, of the meeting and what time zone that is in. And hopefully if you have a sophisticated calendar, it will automatically be able to read that. You'll have the direct link to the meeting ID, and then you'll also have One Tap Mobile. And One Tap Mobile is exactly as it sounds for the mobile users. There are some who have joined us today using this feature. And so this is a great way if you're on a mobile to dial in, and it's very simple. And then lastly, there's the dial in by location, which I just mentioned to you. So you'll see this is sort of an example of what you would see in this scenario. And again, just a reminder, you don't need to dial in if you're using computer audio. You only need to dial in if you're choosing to use your telephone audio. I would suggest whenever possible you use your computer audio, unless some of those scenarios that I spoke about earlier are some of what you're dealing with. Okay. So just a couple of other things. I did already go through some of the mute and video functions that you will find. This is just a very simple reminder here of what these things look like. So obviously, if there is an X across any of these features, it means that you have them turned off. And if there is not an X across those features, it means that they're currently turned on. Okay, it's really that simple. Generally speaking, you want to have your microphone muted so that any sound on your side is not interrupting the meeting. So you might, be unmuted at the beginning, but if you aren't going to contribute to the session for some time, then go ahead and mute yourself until you need to actually jump in and speak. Now, of course, don't forget to unmute yourself when the time comes up. But do know that if you're in a session like I have set up today where everyone is muted, if you are unmuted by the host and then you mute yourself, you won't be able to unmute yourself. The host will need to unmute you at that point. So here's just a little tip on something that you could do. If you need to jump in and speak, you can always use your telephone audio and join in that way. Okay. Hey, Amy, I see that you jumped onto video here. Was that intentional? All right.
It was intentional. Thank you.
Awesome. Did you have a question?
I did not. I was testing your feature.
Thank you so much for doing that. Does anybody else want to test the feature? I love that you did that. Anybody else want to jump in and try their video? Brave souls who put lipstick on today. Oh, here we go. All right. There you go. There you go. Your hair looks great, ladies. Hi, Stephanie. Hi, Lori. Hi, Catherine. Hi, Kathy. All right, so you ladies have it down. So you're all muted, but thank you for jumping in and showing everybody how easy that is to take yourself on and off the video function. So thank you. Okay, awesome. All right, so I'm going to continue on. And just a couple of things, before we get into the hosting function that I just want to go back in and really sort of address here. And that is, don't get flustered if you're in the event and it doesn't go exactly as you thought. So what if you join and your video's on, or so what if, something isn't going right? As I mentioned, Zoom has a lot of different features, different types of, all kinds of different help. And I'm going to show you where some of that is, but I put a couple of them into this presentation today because before we get into hosting, this is generally if, you know, my camera isn't working, if my phone isn't working, you know, those types of things are very much available to you, and here's the link to those. So if you need to troubleshoot, if any of you joined us today and you can't get your video working, probably something in your personal settings on your computer is preventing that. And I will say that if you're working from a Mac in particular, that gets a little tricky because they do have a lot of inherent settings that will make it difficult for you to use some of these features without disabling them. So that's just my little tip for you Mac users. I've come across a lot of people who have to take a few extra minutes to troubleshoot with the Mac. So definitely use some of these features, please. Okay. And then a few other things, you know, this sounds super, super simple, but if you're having trouble, you can always message the host. They might be able to give you a hand depending on whether or not they're, you know, in this case, obviously I'm presenting, so it's a little hard to help somebody troubleshoot, but in a lot of the meetings when I'm hosting, people do send me a message and ask for some tips on how they could do something differently so they can hear better or see better or whatever that might be. If you're really desperate, you can always leave and rejoin the meeting. And so if your screen gets hung up or you can't figure out, you know, what's happening, just disconnect and jump back into the meeting. Sometimes that just, you know, does what it needs to do for you and you can get out of whatever problem you were in. And then finally, you could always use one of the other methods to connect. So, you know, if you were connecting via URL and for some reason you can't get your audio on, well, just join via phone, right? I mean, it's that simple. So those are some of the basic things you need to know to really be a good meeting participant in a Zoom meeting. And now I'm gonna sort of jump in and start talking a little bit about hosting because I really wanna get into some of the features here that you might be interested in as a host. So I'm actually going to walk you through a few features and then I'm going to jump out of the PowerPoint and go into Zoom and show you how I set up a meeting so you can see some of these features and how they actually function during the setup process. It's very important that you start out right. So you want to make sure that you're setting up right from the beginning with the right setup features as well as the right security. So you can't possibly have missed in the news all of the various, you know, blogs and newspaper reports and school districts talking about the privacy and security of Zoom. And so one of the things that you as the host really need to think about when you are setting up a meeting is what is necessary for this meeting. Zoom has been, over the course of the last few weeks, taking very active feedback from their communities about improving privacy and security. And they have literally almost every day been implementing new processes, enabling new settings, or creating new standards for their community to support some of the feedback that they have been receiving. For instance, I have a pro account. And in my account, I received a message last week saying they were going to implement a new process that required us to have a password with every meeting. The reason for that was a type of account I had. They decided that they had, you know, so many from that community with feedback asking for additional security that they made that a new standard. So that is one example of something that they did. Now you're wondering, well, then why didn't I need a password to join today? And so while they implemented a program like that, they actually went and based on different users started to disable some of those types of things because it made it very difficult for people in the business community to operate. So for instance, the education industry, maybe the healthcare industry, who are very active new users right now, became very loud voices talking about some of the concerns they had, particularly with students and others and how they were utilizing the systems. They realized they had this entire business community that's been with them a long time that didn't want those extra features in place and didn't need them. And so they're trying to find, they being Zoom, trying to find the right balancing act to maintain you know, the business process that their business users are used to, while also providing some additional security enhancements and participation privacy at the same time. So when you start a Zoom account, you will be asked, what type of account you want to set up. And essentially, if you get an education account that comes through an education community or a healthcare account with a healthcare community, you will be in a scenario where you have many more different restrictions on privacy and security than what I have, because I don't have either of those two types of accounts. Okay. So a couple of things I want to point out. So this is actually a view of what my screen looks like in terms of my management buttons. And so there is a security button. And by the way, this, while it used to be in settings, is actually right on the screen now in Zoom. And that's actually new as part of their security enhancements. Some of the things you could do, I let you see the drop down here. The reason I can't show you easily live is because when I'm using these functions, you can't see them, right? So that's intentional because they don't want the participants to be able to see all of what the host is doing and the administrative functions. So I took a screenshot here so you can see when you're the host, you will have a security button. And so in the security button, you have a certain functions you can do. And basically it allows you to decide, do I want participants to screen share? Do I want them to be able to chat? And then do I want them to rename themselves? Most of you probably didn't even know you could rename yourself, but you can. You can actually do that very easily. In our scenario here, we actually have all of these checked. But if I wanted to have an extremely secure environment, if I was a teacher with students, I might not want to have any of those available to my students because I might be worried that they're going to misuse them in some way that's inappropriate for the large audience. So we're all professionals here. We want to enable you to be able to do as much as you can in the meeting, and so these are enabled for this session. Additionally, I have the ability to remove a participant, and that means literally I can have that participant removed from the meeting permanently, and then I can lock the meeting, which means the meeting has begun and I don't want anybody else coming in. So I know everybody I wanted to come into the meeting is here. I can lock the meeting. So I don't risk, somebody who got access to my URL that I don't want them in my meeting, or it's a type of meeting where I cannot risk anyone else joining. I can lock the meeting. No one else can come in. And then the other feature here is called a waiting room. And basically what that means is that as you join the meeting, you go to a waiting room until the host admits you. So that is another security feature, and you set that up actually in your settings. And I'll show you that when we initiate the meeting, you decide at the beginning, do I want to have a meeting room or not? But you can also do that right here on your screen in the middle of the moment if some reason the meeting gets a little out of control and you need to get some additional security in place. Additionally, you can manage your participants from the screen. And so this will allow you to do things like mute and unmute all of your participants. And it will also give you the ability to control the chat. So right now, and that's these three dots here. If you were to click on those, that's a ability to control chat. And so I can decide, who can chat with who, and if the chat should be public or private. And so those are features that you have the ability to control. You can go in and, when you log into the meeting as host, you go in and set all of those up right at the beginning. And then that way they're there as your basic standards, and you can edit them if you need to as you go. Okay. So I spoke a little bit about sharing your screen, and as the host, most likely you're going to do more than just present on video. Maybe it's just a team meeting and maybe that isn't the case, but even in a team meeting, you're likely to want to share maybe the agenda of the meeting. So be careful, because you can share anything, which means if you select screen, you will literally be sharing everything. So you'll see here, this is the screen that will pop up when you select share. And so the first option for most, the way it's configured, will be screen. And so if you select screen, you will actually be allowing everyone to view anything as you move about your screen. So this has the most risk, obviously, because you might have documents open that have private information, or you might you know, have personal information or pictures or anything like that that you didn't intend to share professionally on your screen. And so the risk, obviously, in this scenario is that we have people who could potentially be sharing things they don't want to share. Okay, then you have the ability to select any of these apps. So these were some of the apps that were open when I took a quick snip. And so you can see I can just select my PowerPoint and it'll launch my PowerPoint. Okay. If you're going to share computer sound, if some of you came into the meeting a few minutes early today, we actually had some music playing. I actually have computer sound on, and I just have that embedded in my PowerPoint, but you can use a media app player if you want to. Just don't forget at the very bottom of the screen when you select share to also share computer sound. If you don't do that, your sound will not be heard by your attendees, except essentially through your microphone as opposed to through your actual video function. Okay, and as I mentioned, as the host, you'll decide if others can share their screen. Okay, so my number one tip of the day is practice first. So if you're going to host a meeting for the first time, particularly if it's anything more than a small group meeting, you definitely want to take a few minutes and get familiar with the functions and do a quick practice round where you can play with all of these features, not in the middle of a meeting where you might accidentally share something you don't want to, or bring someone live who doesn't want to be live, or all kinds of different things like that. So I just wanted to take a minute and say that. And then I do want to show you, you will have this little button here that says more. I highlighted it here for all of you. And some of the other features that you'll see on your screen include record, as well as share computer sound. So you can do that after you've shared your screen if you need to, and then an end meeting function. There are some others here, and they have more to do with the view on your screen. I'm not going to go through them all today, but I did want to take a minute to talk about recording. So if you have a basic free account with Zoom, you can record, but you can only record to your computer because you're not essentially paying for any cloud storage. So you can record, you can drop it onto your own computer, and then you could upload it to YouTube or Vimeo or wherever you might use video if you do want to upload it somewhere and share it. So that is an option for you to have. You can record, and then if you have basically anything more than the basic free account, you do have the ability to record to the cloud, and with every plan there's a maximum storage per month. So you just have to keep an eye on how much of that. But obviously that makes it easy for storage, and it is very easy for sharing. And in that recording function, you can also snip. Okay. All right, so I'm going to take a minute here, and actually, before I jump into my top 10 hosting tips where I'm going to wrap up, I'm actually going to take you for a moment over to Zoom just so I can show you for about 5 minutes what it looks like to start a meeting, to get set up. Okay, so I am sharing the Zoom screen, and this is just a basic login through the web portal. I'm not using the Zoom app for this display. It's just zoom.us. Okay, and I have an account already set up, so it is recognizing me, but obviously if you're going to set up an account, you would take time to do that. I'm going to just show you a few things to navigate on the Zoom page for just a minute. One, under solutions, you will see all of the different products that they have. And then very simply, right here on plans and pricing, you can see some of the accounts that I mentioned. So you can sign up right here if you're looking for a free account. Okay, keep in mind you're limited not just in time, but also in participants. So you'll want to make sure you really understand all the features of these different plans before you decide what you need. You can upgrade at any time, so remember that you could start small and then upgrade even mid-month or anytime you want to. Okay, so I have a pro account, and whether I have a free account or pro account, once I'm logged in, which you can tell I'm logged in because you can see my icon, you can do a lot of different things. But what I'm going to do right now is show you what it looks like to schedule a meeting. because I want to show you how easy this is and how you set many of your controls right in your meeting. So obviously, I just went to schedule a meeting. I get to name my meeting. I can provide a description if I want to. I'm obviously going to select my date and my time of my meeting, as well as my duration. So these are all basic functions. You'll select the time zone, and you can set it up as a recurring meeting. So if this is a series and you want to be able to just offer a single URL for all of those meetings, then set it up as a recurring meeting. And then right here, you're going to see registration. And registration function is not available on a free account, so it's only enabled here because I have a pro account. But what this does is it actually allows you to create a registration process for your event. And that is something that is, very, very useful. I'm going to show you that if I have a minute at the end. There's a couple of additional features in there that you can control. But one thing you can't control is you can't control how many people register for your event, with the exception if your account has a maximum number. So if you have a pro account with only 100 users can come to an event, then only 100 people can register for your event. But that's the only real exception to that. You don't have the ability to control it any further. Okay. It'll auto-generate a meeting ID. You can use a personal ID, but this is one of the reasons that people have spoken a lot about privacy and security. If you expose everyone to your personal meeting ID and you use that for every meeting, then everybody can come to all of your meetings. As I mentioned here, there's a require meeting password. If you want to enable additional security, you can do that. Just make sure your attendees get the password. Now, this is where I was speaking about setting up. So our video right now is set to off as a standard that I have in my own settings. So I have video off and participant off, and that means as I come into the meeting, my video is off and I have to turn it on, as well as the same with my participants. So you would have to set this up for on if you want it to be on as you come in. And then again, here is your audio settings. So my standard is selected as telephone and computer audio, but you can just select one or the other if you don't want to have a meeting that has telephone or computer audio in it. And then some of the meeting options here that I want to take a minute and show you. There's a function called enable join before host. This I do not recommend except under very unusual circumstances. It basically means the meeting can start without you as the host. So you would really have to have some unusual circumstances where I would think you would want that to happen. You can see I have checked, and this again is in my settings, mute participants upon entry. This is selected, you can unselect it. Again, this is only for entry. That doesn't mean that when you get into the meeting, you can't decide to unmute everybody. This is just at the start. My standard settings have a waiting room enabled, and so this allows me to allow certain people into the meeting. Perhaps I want to do a prep session with the speaker. I can let them into the meeting early, get them set up and running, test their audio, and then allow everybody else to come into the session. And then there are a couple other features here: record the meeting automatically and authenticating users. Authenticating users is generally used within organizations where everybody in the organization has an account, and so they could be authenticated because they have a Zoom account already within your organization. Okay, so those are the basics just to get started. If you hit save, you will literally have a meeting ready to go. So it's that simple. And then once you do that, you can share the URL. So very simply, I'll take you into a meeting this meeting right here. Let's take a look at it. This is what it looks like on my calendar today. So once it exists, you can save it to your various calendars. You can invite attendees right here within Zoom, or you can copy the invitation and email it out. You have a lot of options there. Okay, those are your basic functions. Now, before we leave the Zoom screen and jump over for top 10 and then Q&A, which I know we're down to the wire here, I just want to show you that within this same Zoom site, there are so many different help, support, videos, webinars, everything that you can need available. You can get a demo. You can use this resources tab. There's video tutorials, there's live training. I mean, they are doing just a phenomenal job. So if you have specific questions or you need more help after this session, use their blog, use their video tutorials. They're wonderful. So I definitely encourage you to come out here and check all of those materials out, and they are all free to use. There is no fee for any of those, whether you have a free account, no account, or you have, the best corporate account. Those things are all available to you. Okay, so I'm going to just jump out here for just a minute, and I'm going to go back really quickly because I just want to recap with you. So set it up right from the start, and that is really what we just reviewed. All of those various features and functions in your meeting setup are important. And then as you join the meeting, deciding how you want the meeting to operate. Ensure your participants know what to expect. So if you have a session where you're expecting everybody to come in and join via video, make sure they know that, because if they're working from home right now, they might not be thinking they need to turn their video camera on. So give that some thought. Don't forget your lipstick, or at least a nice shirt. So whether you're going to be hosting or you're going to be attending, chances are if you're doing a video call, you should expect that there's some expectation that you're going to appear on camera. Know your basic functions. That goes back to my tip of the day, which is practice with a friend before you get started. And then expect everything won't go exactly right, and that's okay. You can recontrol whatever you need, whatever gets out of control with the click of a button, as I mentioned, some of the things that we've come across in some of these webinars. Okay, my last 5 are specifically for the larger events. I really suggest using a waiting room because it allows you, the host, as well as any of your special guests, like your speakers, to get ready and set up. And so you can let them in to the meeting without letting everybody else into the meeting, so you have a moment to set up. You can control the audio and video, and you should. So you should make sure that you know how to do that, and you should take control. You don't want everybody to be unmuted in a session where you have several hundred participants. That will not work. Restrict your chat function, so either just allow them to private chat or allow them to chat with host, but do not allow public chat if you don't want your large meeting to get out of control. Lastly, consider using the webinar platform. We didn't talk about that much today, but it does give you additional security as well as additional restrictions if you really are hosting very large meetings on a regular basis, or get help because it's very difficult to be the host as well as the presenter for large groups. As I mentioned, there's a lot of things going on during the session that during, with a meeting, a virtual meeting, as opposed to a webinar, it gets a little hard to control. All right, so I am going to pause there, and we are going to let you, please go ahead and use your chat to send me any questions that you might have. And Amy, if you want to rejoin me, I don't know if you want to rejoin on video or just audio, but if you have
audio is fine.
Great.
Audio is fine. So let me. That was great, Valerie. Thank you so much. It was very comprehensive, and the tutorial was very high level, so it was great. We have 134 guests registered for this webinar, so I want to get right to their questions. But I'm going to kick it off with just one question. Many businesses are looking to broaden their reach to their consumers. Sharing content in an online community is one of the ways in which we could do that, and by streaming video and having our webinar live on various platforms will help us broaden our reach. What are your thoughts on streaming our webinar?
Yeah, you can. So with some of the Zoom functions and the more advanced pay accounts, you actually can integrate your Zoom functions into things like Facebook Live and LinkedIn. And so you do have the ability to go multi-platform using Zoom. So if you are thinking about, hosting very large events like that would, encourage different audiences on different platforms, that is absolutely something that you can do and you can look into. Obviously, that's a little bit more advanced, but there is a lot of information on that out on the Zoom website. I do see some other questions coming in, so I'm going to take a few of those here. I'm just checking my time. I've got a couple minutes. So there's a question about a co-host, and I didn't cover that, but you can have a co-host in a meeting. However, the restrictions for most accounts require you to be in the same organization. So you, for instance, if the Chamber of Commerce had a chamber corporate account and all of the users had accounts, then it's very simple to co-host with somebody else, and you can actually do that right in the meeting by clicking on the participant's name, and you could either make them a host or a co-host. Right now, I could make anybody else in this meeting a host, but unfortunately, based on the type of participants that are here, I don't have anybody I can make a co-host because nobody else is in my organization, and that's the type of account that I have. Okay, there's some questions with breakout groups, and we don't have a lot of time to get into those tutorials, but it is part of the basic functions. And so you absolutely positively can use breakout group sessions, and there is a really wonderful, very short recorded video on that on the site where I just showed you the resources on how to use breakout group sessions. And I encourage you to take a peek at that because it works very well, and the host has a lot of control there. So I definitely would suggest you take a peek at that video for the tutorial. Okay, I think I've got just a couple others here. So there is a question about how do I post a video or a photo of myself rather than live video, and you can do that in your settings. So you will want to go into your settings. You'll need to have an account in order to do that, and so you can create an account, even just a free account, and in your settings you can upload a picture of yourself. You see on mine I actually have my company logo there, but you can do any of those types of things inside the settings, but you do have to have an account. If you're just logging in through URL, it won't recognize you. And you can't replace a photo. You can't replace your video with your photo. Your video is your video. So, so that will never go away. Okay, there was some question about PowerPoint and teaching classes through Zoom, being organized on PowerPoint ahead of time. So I definitely suggest, you know, having your PowerPoint organized in advance, and absolutely PowerPoint is probably the easiest thing that you can control and share. Everything I did here today, with the exception of dropping out to the Zoom website, was all on PowerPoint, including what you're looking at here. So it is definitely your best way to prepare for a meeting in general, and one of the easiest things to utilize through a live platform of any kind. You can also use video. There's a question here on, can I stream video? You can stream video through Zoom, absolutely, but don't forget to turn on the audio. If you remember, when you select to share your screen, make sure when you select to share your screen, you choose audio. Otherwise, they won't hear the audio that goes along with the video. And it shares just as easily as a PowerPoint does. So I would suggest you use the video from the video viewer as opposed to embedding it in your PowerPoint. I find that you do have a better presentation if you can manage the back and forth of sharing your screen. That is it. Okay, we are at the end, and I'm sorry, I know there were a few more questions. You absolutely can come out to lessonalive.com and find us on the Contact Us page. And if you have a question, I'd be more than happy to get that back to you. So just send me a note through there. You can also connect with us on LinkedIn at Lesson Alive, as well as Twitter. And any of those ways you can find us and communicate with me. I'll answer any questions that you have that way. So Amy, would you like to conclude for us today?
I would, thank you. So thank you, Valerie, that was great. And thank you to everyone that came out today to do the webinar. If you have any questions for potential topics that you would like us to bring to the membership and to the community, please email those to us at chamber.com. And I think we have one more closing slide, Val, if you can bring that up, that shows our upcoming webinar. We have one scheduled for Thursday that you can tune into, and that is through the PA Chamber of Commerce. Okay, we'll make sure we get that up. That's
sorry about that, Amy. I did want to show that for you, so I didn't have that prompted, and I apologize. Here's the meeting boo-boo. All
So
right.
ScrantonChamber.com/events is the source page for you to see all of our upcoming activities. Please keep an eye out. Oh, there we go. Thursday at 1:30, the 16th, on unemployment compensation and COVID-19, and that is brought to you through the PA Chamber of Commerce. So thank you, everybody. Have a great day. Valerie, thank you again, and look forward to seeing you next time.
Yep. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining. Have a great day.